Hello, welcome to the podcast. My name's James, and today we are going to talk about the elements. So last podcast we discussed the modalities and what it looks like in a chart if we have some kind of lack or overemphasis of certain modalities and how that kind of plays out. And so I kind of wanted to do the same thing for the elements. I think with the elements, though, there's so much to them. I really like looking at the elements because I think a lot of how things kind of work in astrology, the elements actually have a bit more important role than at least from my observations, a lot of people seem to give credit for. But they do influence things a lot in terms of how the different signs interact. And so when you have planets and specific elements, you really do seem to notice certain changes relative to others. And so this episode, I think, is going to be a bit more brief, just kind of discussing the elements generally, as well as some quick observations. But then from there, I do want to look at them both in terms of polarities and also in terms of what are some of the differences between the signs within each element and kind of how that what we can notice and learn from them. So first and foremost, what are the elements? Well, back in the ancient times, when they were kind of coming up with a lot of different thoughts on how the world worked, everything else, they didn't have microscopes, obviously. They didn't understand what the world and nature looked like at a microscopic level. They didn't understand the ideas of molecules, atoms, cells, things like that. And so they kind of came up with their own thinking on that stuff. And one of the frameworks that they came up with was that everything was composed of one of the four elements, the elements being fire, air, earth, and water. And so that was something they kind of had as a kind of, I don't want to say scientific, but it was a concept that they have. And so when astrology kind of came along, it was obviously taken and applied to that in terms of coming up with meanings of the various different signs. Now, one thing that we can notice is that with the elements as we use them today, it's much like the zodiac signs themselves, in the sense of the actual term that we would use is really just an analogy for the actual meaning of the thing. We use a specific symbol or an archetype to kind of represent something because from its physical nature, we can then take that and understand it beyond just giving it some mundane or some random name. Like, if we, instead of fire signs, we just called them, sign X or whatever. That doesn't really tell us much. But if we say, hey, fire is a really good analogy for it. Why? Well, if we think of the nature of fire, we can understand the nature of the element then. And so that was kind of the idea. The zodiac signs did the same thing, right? When they picked the various animals and other symbols, they picked them because it made sense in terms of what that sign represented. It was a good analogy for it. And it made it a lot easier to learn at a time when reading was not really commonplace. Everything was passed down, via story or via recitation. So it's the same thing with the elements. And so what do we have? We have four elements: fire, air, earth, and water. They come in two polarities, right? If you look at a chart, the fire signs will always be opposite the air signs, and the earth signs will always be opposite the water signs. And because of that, and because they always move in the same order in the chart, going first fire, then earth, then air, then water, because of that repeating pattern of four, they will always be in triangles to each other. That is, the fire signs will always be forming a 120-degree angle for each angle triangle. They'll always be a trine from each other. Same with the earth, same with the water, and so on. This also means you are going to get, because of that kind of, again, repeating pattern, you will get one element for each modality for a very nice, even distribution. Now, what do these signs represent? Well, I like to think of them in terms of this polarity. I think it's very helpful because it gives us a sense of kind of what one does versus the other. So if we think of fire and air first, the fire signs to me represent, I think of it as like energy or motivation, right? It's the stuff inside on a very personal and individual level that propels us forward through life, to go out and do things, to act, to be, to exist, and to live. It's the stuff that really gives us a motivation and a vibrance and a zest for life. It's going to be things like desire, lust, competitiveness, beliefs, right? It's all the things within us that really kind of push us towards something, right? Give us that fuel to want to strive somewhere, somehow. Now, if we think of fire, right? Fire by itself, if it has no fuel, will simply dissipate and snuff out. And so fire needs fuel. It needs something to kind of get it going. In addition, if fire wants to spread, it needs what? It needs the wind to blow it. It needs more oxygen, so there's more fuel to find. In the same way, we can think of fire signs really needing the air component in order to harness their energy, harness their motivations. The air signs represent thinking, planning, organization, intellect, also socializing because they are collective in nature, right? The air signs are quick and they're moving and they're flowing, right? If we think of the masses, we think of the collective, what happens? You get people that are always on the move, always changing, always talking, right? When we talk to other people, there's a huge range of ideas that might come upon things. And so when we think of this kind of, there's two dynamics here. There's the dynamic of this collective versus individuality, right? Fire signs are very individualistic, but air signs are very collective. They deal with people, but then also deals with intellect versus motivation. If we're motivated but we have no intellect, we'll just kind of wildly flail around in life. And if we have intellect but no motivation, we'll sit and we'll think and we'll map out some pretty genius stuff, but it never comes to fruition. And so that's really the true dynamic between these two. The air signs also deal with communication. Again, going back to that, and socializing, kind of goes back to that collectiveness. The earth signs and the water signs. The earth signs represent the tangible qualities of life, the tangible reality. We have a physical body. We have physical needs. We have to eat. We have to sleep. We can feel. We can touch. We can hear. We can smell. We can taste. Obviously, we can gather possessions. There is a tangible, substantive reality that we live in. So the earth signs deal with this, and they're very practical because they're dealing with stuff that has a physical reality to it. On the other hand, the water signs deal with the intangible quality. They deal with the impractical. They're very, I don't want to say diluted because that's not the right word, but they're very much caught up in something that is not real. They deal with the non-reality, as well as they deal with the parts of ourselves and our consciousness that are not physically real, but may be real in other non-physical ways. So what does that mean? That's very abstract. Well, water signs are pretty abstract. We have physical bodies, yes, as humans, and we have physical needs, and we can meet those needs. But the thing is, even if we do, even if we're exceedingly wealthy and fully fed and fully clothed at all times, and made to feel as comfortable as possible, we can still be terribly unhappy and unfulfilled people. Why? Because we have emotional needs and we have spiritual needs. There are things inside of us, you call it a soul if you want, that has needs beyond just the physical body. And so the water signs deal with that. In addition, people are social by nature. As much as we are a species that is highly individualistic, people need each other. There's a collective kind of need within us, not just to act as a society, but to really truly connect, to have attachments to things, to emotionally blend in with things. All right, I grew up as a Protestant Christian. And one of the things that you see in the book of Genesis is when talking about Adam and Eve and what the desire that God has for Adam, is he says with Adam in regards to Eve is go out and cleave to your wife, and the two will become one flesh, right? They become one, they blend. And this is what the water signs really want to do. They want to merge. They want to become the other thing so that it becomes something else, right? They want to have that level of connection to things, not just to other people, but to things as well. And I'm not saying we need to have some kind of weird relationships with our things, but people have emotional attachments. You have sentimental items, and that's where that wateriness comes from. So the water signs deal with that intangible stuff. They also deal with, like I said, emotional states. They're psychological in nature because, again, we have aspects of us that are not physically tangible. We can't see them, but we can think and we can feel. And so the water signs are going to deal with that. Now, if we think, again, back to the analogy or the kind of the physical side of it, right? The earth is cold and it's barren, and it's not on its own. It doesn't grow anything. All right, it's not fruitful. There's no life within it. But if you add water, the seed will grow within the earth. So it needs both to live, but the water is what provides that nourishment, provides that kind of gentle, soft touch to it. There's other things we can talk about in regards to that, but for the time being, I want to kind of briefly touch on this. And on the flip side, if we think of water, if we just have water by itself scatters. It is formless, right? It changes shape based on the container it's within. And so what earth does is it provides that container, both to hold, but also to soak up the water. And so in the same way, our physical reality that we live in, the physical world, the physical signs, deal with the practical side of life so that we can have some semblance of a container for the impractical or the intangible side of life, the emotional, the spiritual, the connective. And so that's how I kind of see the signs, or rather the elements, in these two polarities. They deal with, again, fire being kind of, broadly speaking, our motivations, our energy. Air being our kind of collective, social, intellectual. Earth being the tangible, and water being the intangible. And so when you have planets in any of these elements, they will tend to operate in that frame of reference. Mars is the planet of action, but Mars is going to act more practically in an air sign, but more vibrantly and energetically in a fire sign. And that's kind of what we would see. And each fire sign will have that sense of vibrance and energy for Mars. And same thing, that practical kind of slower plodding nature of Mars in an earth sign will stay the same regardless of which of the signs it is. Now, obviously, they have different rulers, different modalities, which will change the shape. And that's part of the complexity of the zodiac and of astrology. But at the very baseline, if we can understand this framework, this reference point, as far as the elements go, we can know the mode in which a planet or a sign is going to operate. So I think that's good for today. Again, in the next couple episodes, I really do want to kind of look at the elements more specifically. I don't know if I'm going to do them one episode for each element yet, or if I want to kind of look at them more in the polarities. So there may be a slight amount of repetition, but it will be much more in depth than we looked at today. So that's the elements. Thanks for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed.